Hello. I've talked a fair number of times in some of the stories that involve trials that all male juries tend to lean towards acquitting females who did bad, particularly murder. Female juries were not a thing for many years, and whether they were or weren't was dictated by each state. Some states automatically allowed women to serve on juries once they were allowed to vote. Some states did not recognize that allowance. For quite some time before that, speculation would be made that people were starting to think that women on juries would indeed be a good thing. In the Weekly Messenger newspaper in 1912, a story was mentioned about a woman tried in Chicago for the murder of her husband. Her testimony? Well, she practically pled guilty. Her lawyer did plead guilty on her behalf, and she was acquitted by an all-male jury. The state attorney for the case firmly believed had women been on the jury, it would have been a different verdict. Quote, "With women, we would avoid the morbid sentiment that is always injected into such cases." End quote. What is he trying to say in such a highfalutin way? That women would have no qualms about saying a woman is guilty. Illinois is not one of these states that allows for women on a jury, but already in 1912 there are a few that are. The Chicago prosecutor would say that where women were serving as jurors, they were proving to be fair and very intelligent. 1913. A story out of Paris shows that they too are having a hard time getting a conviction for a man murdering another man, or of a woman if, "but I love her so," is the defense. Mixed juries are being proposed. One Christabel Pankhurst, editor of the Suffragette, quote, "I am in favor of women in the jury box. Women have a finer sense of justice than men, and on a jury would have just as thorough an understanding of the responsibilities resting upon them. And she would be fearless, while to her intellectual equality with her brothers on the jury, she would add the sixth sense of intuition often so necessary in court." Her viewpoint might be different than men's, but men differ among themselves. Besides, the mixed jury seems to me to offer just what justice needs: severity tempered with indulgence. Women are better judges of women than men are. Women alone understands her sex, its weaknesses and shortcomings. She would and could administer the same justice to the old and unlovely women as to the young and beautiful girl. Without women on juries, real justice is a myth. Without mentioning other countries, but she does, just wait. In England, I am sorry to say, the men are more and more coming to regard lightly the offense of men who ruin young girls. Male juries, dealing with these brutes, indulgently give them light punishments. Women should be called to serve on such juries, as well as in all other cases where what here in France are called crimes passionnels are the issue. In our courts, property is held more sacred than a woman's or a girl's honor. Man's view prevails. With them, it is property first, life afterwards. Women put it the other way around. Lastly, men consider it a nuisance to have to serve on a jury. They get out of it if they can. A woman places duty on a higher, more sacred plane than that. If called to serve, most of them would, and uncomplainingly. End quote. 1913, San Francisco. San Francisco's first all-female jury is in place, actually at the request of the defendant, and it was granted. The judge on this particular case has expressed his approval, saying there was no flippancy, no desire to evade their duty, and expressed his faith in the honesty and intuition of women to detect lies. If these women are like my mother, heck yeah, that woman has a built-in lie detector. 1919. Some states continue to allow females on juries, but not New York State. Here are women who are attorneys and lawyers, but no women are allowed on juries. As of April 1919, the suffrage states, meaning states that allow women to vote, that let women on juries are Kansas, California, Utah, Nevada, Idaho, Washington, and as of very recently in this story, Michigan. The suffrage states that do not allow women on juries: New York, Montana, Colorado, Arizona, and the Alaska Territory. At one point in time, Illinois, Wyoming, and Oregon all allowed it, and then pivoted and stopped. Now, I love Wyoming. I've been there a handful of times on vacation, but back in the day, Wyoming had a lawyer who was a bit of a you-know-what. So at one time, women were serving as jurors in Wyoming even before the state allowed women to vote. But when they were allowed to vote, the right of them to be on juries was challenged. There was a judge, Judge Howe, who would say that if you had the right to vote, you had all other rights, and at his trials and on his juries served women. He stated, quote, "In the outlaw communities of our state, the women are the only solid and reliable citizens capable of just decisions," end quote. Well, here we have the bleepity-bleep lawyer that would challenge him and say that the judge did not have the right to make the ruling. Judge Howe overruled the objection because he can, and the lawyer would say, quote, "Then, Your Honor, I will appeal to higher court," end quote. Replied Judge Howe, quote, "You forget, sir, that I am a member of that higher court and that all my colleagues sitting there favor my view of the matter," end quote. Quote, "Well, in that case, Your Honor, as judges do not resign, there's a possibility, at least, of their dying, and all one can do is to wait," end quote. Well, no, this is not turning into a murder trial, if that's what you're thinking, but unfortunately, at one point, Judge Howe would become quite ill and would have to end his tenure as judge. With the loss of the champion for women's rights, so ended the point of time that Wyoming had women on juries. 1919. So let's go back to Michigan, who had just recently at this point allowed for women on juries. Justice Landon would state that they were the most business-like jury he had encountered in many years. Now, interestingly, the women did not need to come to court until in the afternoon so that their at-home duties were not interfered with. They served for 3 hours, then dismissed, then returned the next morning and rendered the verdict within a half hour. Judge said he would definitely do this again. 1921. New York State looking at New Jersey, saying that New Jersey is allowing women on their juries. Now, this is interesting. Edgefield Advertiser, January 9th, 1921. Quote, "The present law provides that any person subpoenaed for jury duty who fails to respond is subject to punishment for contempt of court and may be fined to the extent of $100, end quote. It's also mentioned that presently it's difficult for courts to find complete juries of men. Men, according to this newspaper, do not want to serve and will provide any excuse available. The fear is that women will do the same. However, the newspapers mention women providing some excuses like necessity shopping and bridge club meeting. But of course, there are women who are gung-ho to be on a jury. Judge Dugan of New Jersey was the first to attempt the so-called experiment. Judge had a panel of 300 male jurors drawn for his court at the beginning of the year. Excuses after excuses were made, and he was running out of men. Women had got the vote. Let's try them. The women were picked and appeared promptly on receipt of the summons. No one had an excuse. Now, apparently, Mrs. Thomas Edison, that Thomas Edison, had called in to say she could not be there because her husband was unwell. But if the judge could not find a replacement, she would find a way. Mrs. Colby, foreman of this first New Jersey female jury, talked over the situation with women and said that they fought for the votes for so long and finally got it. They should not object to this important responsibility, and when a summons comes a call-in, they could accept it. After the trial ended, Mrs. Colby would say, quote, "It was the most interesting experience. It was the first time I had ever had the chance to watch the operations of a court, and there were lots of things we didn't understand, but of course we couldn't interrupt to ask questions. The most astounding thing to me was when two witnesses swore to exactly the opposite thing on the same point. We had to decide between them as to which was telling the truth, and we had nothing at all to go upon. We knew nothing about their history or what kind of people they were, and yet we had to determine which one was lying and which one was telling the truth. Of course, one of them was lying, but he was permitted to come into court and swear to a lie that he knew was a lie, and the jury decided against him. Decided that he was lying, but he was allowed to go without anything being done to him. Our case, of course, was a simple one." End quote. Now, she goes on with the story for a bit, and just for something different, we're going to listen. Quote, there was a dentist who came from a family of hucksters. There were 3 brothers, and the dentist had taken one of his brothers and kept him in school, sending him through high school. Afterward, the boy became a huckster, but also helped in the office of his brother, the dentist. One of the witnesses, a woman, testified that she went to the dentist's office one evening at 8 o'clock, and the boy tried to pull a tooth for her, but the tooth broke, and the blood began to flow. The boy told her she would have to go away and come back again when the tooth stopped bleeding. She went away, and when she came back, her jaw was terribly swollen, and she was suffering intensely. The boy explained that he could do nothing until the swelling went down, but as the pain was so great, she decided she must have treatment immediately and went to another dentist. The new dentist treated her and extracted the piece of tooth left in her jaw and told her to take it back to the other dentist and show him what he had done. The 3 brothers all swore that the boy was merely a huckster and that he had never been in the dentist's office and had never worn a white coat in his life. But the woman positively identified the boy, and other witnesses also identified him and said he had treated them in his brother's office. The boy was placed in a group of men seated in the courtroom instead of on the platform, and still the witnesses had no difficulty in picking him out. They were also very positive in their statements and could not be confused, and they didn't have any reason to be against the boy unless he really had been in the office. End quote. The defendant was initially pleased as punch to have a female jury the morning the trial started. He would say, quote, I'd much rather be tried by a jury of women than by a jury of men, he remarked on the morning that the case opened. Quote, women wouldn't be fair to a woman who is being tried, but with a man, it'll be different. I'm satisfied, all right. End quote. Well, they found him guilty. Probably not what he was anticipating. 2 of the 12 women thought about acquitting him because they felt sorry for the defendant's brother, but within 17 minutes total, boom shakalaka, guilty. Judge Dugan was pleased. Quote, we have found women juries an unqualified success, and they have had the effect of making men juries easier to get. The men seem a little ashamed of themselves, and they are not offering so many excuses to escape serving. I think including women in the jury list will make the whole business easier. It doubles the number of available jurors, for one thing. It is also possible to get a higher type of women to serve on a jury. The same type of men are too busy to serve. Some of the male juries we have are almost feeble-minded, and the verdicts they render are absolutely ridiculous. I have thrown out many verdicts of men juries and ordered retrials. Sometimes I let them stand because it doesn't make any difference anyway, but often the verdicts are too irrelevant to the facts. End quote. He's cautious about murder trials or long civil cases. Unfortunately, it's because he thinks the women would get tired, but he also agrees that he has seen male jurors nodding off and dozing in the jury box. Women could not be any worse. Next up, trying out a mixed jury of half women and half men. We're still hanging out in 1921, but have traveled to Ohio. A Cincinnati defense lawyer would make it clear what side he stood on. We're on a first-degree murder trial. We've got a preliminary panel of 30 men and women. And by the time we've gone through all of them, we only have half the jury panel. Every time a woman was about to be declared eligible, the lawyer would issue a challenge to allowing the woman on the jury and wouldn't sugarcoat it at all. So it was becoming obvious that he was deliberately being prejudiced, and so he was asked about this to see if he would give a truthful opinion. Mr. Ballard said, quote, "No, I don't mind. The records thus far in criminal cases have shown that women jurors always are for conviction. Women are merciless, much more so than men." End quote. New York State still not allowing it. Bills get introduced and denied. Judge Talley ain't having it, doesn't want it. Amy Wren, Brooklyn attorney, does. What does Ms. Wren think about Talley's opinions? Quote, "Go and see Judge Talley if you wish. His opinions on the subject are fairly well known. Judge Talley sees but one occupation for women in this world. If she can't catch a husband, according to his theories, she might as well tie a rock to her neck and jump overboard." End quote. The newspaper is saying that Talley's views are not quite so visual, but Talley does say, quote, "Back to the whole question of women jurors, women voters, women legislators, women generally in public life looms forth one great and indisputable fact. and that is that woman approaches the problems of life with her heart and not with her head. The history of mankind gives testimony to that truth. It has been so held by sages and by saints and is known and accepted by every youth who has wooed a maid. Legislation that is just and beneficent may give to woman rights and privileges that have hitherto been denied her. But no written statute can transform what nature has wisely ordained. Woman will continue to be a creature of infinite variety. Her delicate reserve will always be the very breath of moral life and the basis of her incomparable charm. As long as she is woman, her emotional strain will dominate her rational processes, and she'll continue to be the inspiration of romance, poetry, and art as long as civilization will endure. Some women may still storm against what they call the inequalities of the laws, and they may, with great resolve, pronounce their unyielding abhorrence and detestation of the word male when it is found between the covers of a statute book. But in their hearts they know that the law of nature is paramount to the law of man. The one is human, finite, fallible. The other is divine. And it is part of the divine plan that woman is destined and qualified for the bearing of the children of the race and for the creation and guardianship of the homes of the world and of their maintenance and love and honor. In the chances of life, some women escape from the primary duties of their sex, but laws are not made nor customs formed for or by the exceptional. Public policy requires that certain laws be made for the protection of women for no other reason than that they are women. The laws prevailing throughout the land regulating the hours and methods of the employment of women are instances which readily occur to mind. Our exceptional woman says to the law, quote, "You shall not provide that I may not work as long or as late as a man. By so doing, you are interfering with my rights as an adult citizen and voter to sell my services when and how and where I please." But the highest court in our land says to the woman, "The future of the race is of more importance than your right of contract. The maintenance of healthy women and the need for healthy offspring is paramount to your earning capacity and ambition. You are a woman, and the law will protect you even against yourself for the general welfare of the Republic." I am mindful that these things are trite and familiar, but all fundamentals are necessarily so, and these considerations are basic and fundamental. End quote. Back to Ms. Wren, the attorney. Quote, "All of the women reporters who came down to cover the case were against the defendant. But when they went back to the city, they wrote the customary sob stories because their unemotional editors gave those orders." After the verdict of acquittal had been rendered, one of the jurors patted the defendant on the back and said, "You didn't think we were going to convict you, did you?" Of course she knew, just as everyone else knew, that those unemotional men with tears in their eyes never would convict a woman of anything. I do not believe that women would be merciless or vindictive in their verdicts. I think they would provide a balance in many ways and elevate the general standard of juries. Women are eager to perform all the duties of full citizens. It is the men and not the women who are constantly objecting to the hardships which this might include. The man insists that he couldn't think of having his wife or his sister hear all of the wicked details that are brought out in the taking of testimony. The wife or the sister feels perfectly capable of hearing the details and surviving, but the man must shield her. End quote. George Gordon Battle, New York lawyer, quote, "Women differ just as men do. Some are inclined to be severe, others merciful. As a general proposition, women are more inclined to be compassionate than men. They have a shrinking from inflicting severe penalties. There are certain offenses with which women would be more inclined to be more severe than men. These are the offenses against children, assault, cruelty, and so forth. Women would feel it more keenly and be eager to punish with a greater severity. In certain other crimes, men would be more severe. In considering commercial crimes, men more accustomed to the standards of honesty in commercial dealing would be more apt to punish violators of these standards. Take the example of a forged check. A woman might overlook the crime, feeling that the bank could well afford to stand the loss, while a man, appreciating that the whole fabric of business depends on the prevention of forgery, would grant little mercy to the criminal. So far as the question of leniency of women towards women defendants go, I should say that women would be more discriminating than men and less likely to be influenced by sex feeling. We all know that men juries are apt to acquit any woman charged with a crime. whether she is a previous good character or merely claims to be. Especially if she is a young and attractive woman, she makes an appeal to a jury of men that can very easily overbalance the weight of testimony. Women are less likely to be influenced by that feeling. I don't mean to say that they would be unjust, but they would not be influenced in the same way that men are. Generally speaking, I should say that women are more inclined to be severe in cases against children, and in cases that appeal to what might be called the maternal instinct, such as cruelty towards the helpless, oppression, and similar offenses. Men would be more severe in cases in which the appeal was to the intellect rather than to the emotions. I do not feel that the inclusion of women would lower the standards. There are numerous occasions when a mixed jury would be mighty useful, giving all shades of opinions and a variety of points of view." End quote. Judge Florence Allen of Ohio. Quote, "It is impossible to generalize concerning women jurors. Some of them, just like men, favor conviction. Some of them, just like men, tend towards acquittal. On the average, I would say they are not sentimental. But women certainly are not merciless, for they have sat on juries in the state this year which have recommended mercy. On the other hand, women have also sat upon juries which voted the death penalty here in Cleveland." End quote. The hesitancy of forcing any kind of policy about women having to serve is based on the pretense in these days of women working for the household, caring for the children, etc., while men work. That because of this, women do not have the worldly experience that men do, though obviously there are men that do not have equal experience either. Lawyer Brenner, quote, "There is not a unanimity of opinion among judges and lawyers as to the advisability of this new departure. It is the conviction of some that there are a number of kinds of cases which would not only be disagreeable, but objectionable from a woman's point of view. There is a feeling of delicacy in submitting certain cases to a jury of women, many of whom might be young and unmarried. Opportunity also should be afforded that class of women to escape jury duty whose domestic demands require her attendance at home. Lawyers generally object to women juries and challenge them. From a Kansas attorney, I have a statement that no woman has served on a jury in that state where it was necessary to keep the jury together for any length of time. He does not recall a case with a woman on the jury where the deliberation is extended beyond 7 hours. His objections to having women on the juries are the long waits and confinement with men of all classes during the trial and deliberations, that the women best qualified to serve will ask for an exemption, and that those serving are usually of little force in the deliberations." End quote. He does look forward, though, to the day when they are able to be engaged in being on a jury. 1924. Chicago criminologists are begging to have all female juries try female killers. Chicago's still at this point not having it, even though there are female attorneys. Prosecutors want this, saying something to the effect of, quote, "Just let a woman judge another of her sex who has glibly removed an eligible man from this world, and she'll be a harsh appraiser." End quote. Now, come on, women will get ticked at another woman simply for killing a potentially marriage-eligible man? She took him out of the available pool of men. Send her to prison. Okay, we were almost there. Recently, a woman was tried by an all-male jury, admitting to the jury that she was drunk off her ass, had a liaison with the man who sold her a car, and couldn't remember whether or not she killed him. Then said that she killed him when he said after the fornication that he wanted to go back to his wife and baby. Unbelievably so sure in her acquittal, she handpicked the jurors herself. And her attorneys didn't call a witness or make an argument, and she was indeed cleared of the crime. Then it's also said that male juries will clear a good-looking woman, but if she's hard-boiled and not attractive, as in the case of the so-called wolf girl, who was a mere accomplice to a murder committed by another during a robbery, she got life imprisonment because she apparently wasn't easy on the eyes. Wolf girl? Jeez. 1932. We're seeing cases where male juries are not being quite so easy on female defendants. Why this change in scenery? Are women no longer quite seen as the helpless ladies tied to railroad tracks needing rescuing? I don't know. This article doesn't say, but it's noted. And we've noted in a few of the stories I brought you that men weren't buying the sob stories and tears and vulnerability a woman could bring to a trial. Not all of the time anyway. Are we turning the tide? 1937. Hey, New York State! You've joined the club, finally! New York State has allowed women to serve on juries. The first female juror, Mrs. Farley, was told she would be chosen and would be photographed. Beatrice Fairfax wrote up a saucy article about it, as printed in the Washington Times, November 1st, 1937. Quote, Mrs. Farley looks as if she would take with her to the courtroom a fair mind and a warm heart. She'll help, I know, to overcome the stupid prejudices that have so long prevailed. We women haven't been any too flatteringly regarded through the ages. Oh, they've loved us, it is true, and praised our pretty faces, and written poems to us, and in one way or another seen to it that we adored them. Which, of course, we do. Of late years, they've even let us vote. But outside household matters, had they ever really given us credit for much sense? As for Mrs. Farley, our pioneer New York State juror, she admits that she likes trials. She makes the very modest claim that she can distinguish between facts and emotions. She believes that women can sit in judgment on financial matters as well as on domestic relations. She doesn't think women's verdicts are going to overturn the world of jurisprudence. In short, she sounds like a keen, kind, sensible woman, and I believe there will be thousands like her. End quote. 1939. Massachusetts is just saying no to female jurors for at least another 2 years. The only two female legislators in the state, Leslie Needham and Susan Donovan, not happy. They would comment after the House made a courtesy reading of the bill before killing it. Quote, the love and affection is okay, but the old harpoon hurts. We want your confidence on a permanent basis. It can't be true that chivalry dies overnight. End quote. So what was the history of women serving on juries? This is just a very short history from the ACLU website. 1879, Supreme Court confirmed that a state could confine the selection of jurors to males. 1898, Utah, the first state to allow women to serve on jury. 1927, only 19 states have followed suit. 1968, Mississippi, the last state to allow women on juries. We mentioned about the vote sometimes being linked to the jury allowance. Note that many states allowed white women to vote well before the 19th Amendment was ratified, which guaranteed white women the right across the board. Story about Judge Howe in Wyoming and the bleepity bleep lawyer, actually from the 1870s. Wyoming, even before it had officially become a state, had allowed women to vote in 1869, and Judge Howe had allowed women to serve on juries then as well. But then that was revoked by the bleepity bleep lawyer. So anyway, this was an interesting puddle dive into this topic that I've been wanting to do for a while. I'd like to do some more stories about this subject in the future. So what do you think? I've served on a jury before in a felony assault case, and it was very interesting to be part of the process. And you can occasionally find me looking for a trial to watch. I'm always curious. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. See you!